In a winter town wrapped in silent snow, where forgotten secrets sleep beneath an abandoned school, a single sound rises from the darkness, pages turning patient relentless as if history itself were trying to breathe again. Sent to uncover the truth, a seasoned agent in a dark suit follows a trail of Cold War whispers that lead to a quiet librarian who carries answers without knowing. Together, they unlock a steel door sealed for 50 years and find a figure the world left behind, still guarding the past, still waiting for the right footsteps to return. And when he finally steps into the winter light, every hidden truth rises with him. Snow fell over Willow Ridge, Virginia, as though the sky itself were shaking out an old feather mattress. The tiny town sat muted beneath the soft weight of winter, and the abandoned Willow Ridge Public School crouched in the center like a tired relic that had forgotten it once held laughter and footsteps. Its bricks were cracked, its windows clouded, and beneath its sagging floors lay a door of cold steel untouched since 1972. Locals whispered that each winter, always in winter, there came a faint rustling from below, the fragile murmur of paper turning itself page by page as if a forgotten archivist were reading files from a century other than the one above. The rumors reached the CIA, and the CIA in turn reached Jason Hale. Jason was a man built from quiet storms and clean lines, tall, athletic, with dark hair combed back in a way that suggested he always expected to walk into danger, but preferred doing it with elegance. He carried himself with the polished ease of someone who wore suits not as clothing, but as extensions of his intent. Tonight, that suit was a charcoal gray ensemble beneath a black winter coat that flared slightly in the cold wind, with leather gloves and a midnight blue tie. Though still in his mid-30s, Jason had the restrained composure of a man who had seen too many lies become truths, and too many truths become tombstones. Years earlier, he had failed a mission in Prague that cost a fellow agent her life, a memory that left an invisible weight on his right shoulder, making him stand a little straighter than he needed to, as if atoning with posture. When the agency assigned him to investigate the sealed Cold War bunker beneath the abandoned school, he accepted without comment, because Jason rarely commented, and because work was the one place where memories stayed silent. He arrived in Willow Ridge just as the silver dawn pressed its cold lips to the horizon. His footsteps crunched on the snow as he walked toward the old school, the faint scent of pine following the breeze, and he paused for a moment, scanning the building with an expression that blended calculation and melancholy. In the dim morning air, he almost looked like a mythic hero exiled into suburbia. Meanwhile, across town, Nora Bennett prepared for another quiet shift at the Willow Ridge Public Library. Nora was 25, slender, in a soft and unassuming way, with warm brown eyes and hair the color of roasted chestnuts cascading in gentle waves. She dressed in cozy sweaters, muted skirts, and scarves that always carried the faint smell of old paper. Her voice was gentle, the kind that made children sit closer during story hour and made elderly patrons forget why they were frustrated in the first place. Nora loved books because they never interrupted her, never raised their voices, and never left without returning eventually. But her gentleness wasn't born from lack of struggle. 5 years earlier, she had survived a car accident that took her parents and left her with a lingering fear of loud, sudden noises. Since then, she walked softly through life, guarding her peace like a flame too easily blown out. Each evening she closed the library and walked home past the abandoned school. And each winter, only winter, she heard the same sound, a faint rhythmic rustling that drifted from the ground like a breath caught between worlds. She always froze for a moment, heart trembling, telling herself it was just mice. Very studious mice, then hurried along the sidewalk. Tonight, as Jason inspected the outer entrance to the school, Nora happened to be passing by. Their meeting was not fate. Not yet. It was simply proximity, dressed in winter. Nora noticed the tall stranger first. Something about his posture alert, poised out of place in their sleepy town, made her tighten the scarf around her neck. Jason noticed her next, but did not speak. He simply offered a polite nod, the minimal acknowledgement of a man trained to observe without being observed. She nodded back, then looked quickly toward the school as another faint rustling rose from deep below, like someone flipping a thin page with a gloved hand. Nora stiffened. "It's just the wind," she said softly, mostly for herself. Jason listened, and the slight narrowing of his eyes said he already knew it was not the wind. But he didn't push. Instead, he watched her walk away her boots, leaving neat little prints that the snow tried to swallow. When she vanished around the corner, Jason turned back to the building. The rustling stopped, as if whatever or whoever was beneath the school had paused to listen to him in return. Jason inhaled the sharp winter air, slipped one gloved hand into his coat, and stepped toward the entrance. The cold metal handle waited for him like an invitation. Far beneath the school in darkness, older than his career, a single sheet of paper turned itself over. Morning in Willow Ridge arrived as a pale smear of light pressing through low clouds, the kind of winter dawn that felt hesitant, as if the sun were unsure whether this small town deserved warmth today. Jason Hale stood inside the modest CIA field office, set up temporarily in an old railway warehouse. Its steel beams creaked in the cold, and its air held the faint scent of dust and aged iron. On a metal table before him were several battered folders, their corners curled like old leaves, and on the topmost file was a name written in thick, fading ink, Thomas Mercer. Thomas Mercer had been a CIA field operative during the Cold War, a man known for his quick logic and even quicker disappearances. According to what little remained in the archives, Mercer vanished in 1978 during a domestic intelligence sweep linked to Soviet infiltration rumors. The official story labeled him missing, presumed dead, but Jason had never trusted files that concluded anything with such tidy vagueness. As he scanned through the brittle pages, he noted Mercer's reputation: clever, meticulous, strangely solitary. A man with no spouse, no close friends, and no recorded emotional ties, except, curiously, a record of multiple visits to the Willow Ridge Public School between 1971 and 1972 for facility inspection assistance. Jason flipped the final page and almost missed it. On the inside flap, written in a thin scrawl, barely visible unless the light hit just right, was a handwritten message. "Ask the librarian." He stared at it for a long moment, feeling a subtle tug, a familiar echo of puzzles he thought he had outgrown. When he picked up the file, a slip of paper fluttered out, a class photo from 1972. He recognized the school, the peeling wall behind the children. At the edge of the frame stood an older man with graying hair, work-worn hands, and an apron smudged with sawdust. The caption read, "Harold Bennett, School Carpenter." Jason filed the documents, slid into his coat, and headed toward the library. Snow had begun falling again, fine and slow, like ash drifting from a distant fire. Nora Bennett was already at her desk when he stepped inside. The Willow Ridge Public Library smelled of cedar shelves and parchment, warmed by the soft glow of vintage lamps. Nora sat in her usual seat behind the counter, a pencil tucked behind one ear as she worked through a stack of returned books. She looked up with her gentle brown eyes when she heard the door open and froze when she saw the austere man in the dark coat from the night before. "You're from the school, aren't you?" she asked softly. Jason nodded. "Jason Hale, CIA. I need to ask you something." Her brows drew together, worry flickering through her expression, though her voice remained calm. Nora was the kind of person who processed fear in small, silent gulps rather than sudden starts. Jason set a worn, cloth-bound book on the counter. Its cover was faded to a dusty rose, the gold lettering nearly rubbed away. When Nora saw it, the color drained from her face. The book was unmistakable. She had inherited it from her grandfather Harold Bennett. When he passed a book, he insisted, "She keeps safe, because stories protect us when we forget how to protect ourselves. She hesitantly touched the cover. Her hands were steady, but her breath trembled. "Where did you find this?" "In the abandoned school," Jason said, "inside a locked drawer in a basement classroom." "Do you recognize it?" Nora nodded slowly. It was his favorite. He read it every winter. Jason flipped open the final pages. Pressed between two brittle sheets like a fragile autumn leaf held between seasons, lay a small shard of copper-colored metal, a fragment of a key. The edges bore a pattern consistent with Cold War-era mechanisms, distinctively crafted, the sort used in underground safe houses or sealed intelligence rooms. Nora stared at it as if it were something alive. "That was inside the book," she whispered. "It's been there for decades." Jason watched her carefully. "Did your grandfather ever mention a man named Thomas Mercer?" No, Nora answered, though uncertainty tightened her voice. "He never talked about his work, not really. He always made it sound simple. Repairs, carpentry, fixing windows." Her words faltered. Jason said nothing, letting her thoughts unravel on their own. Nora looked toward the tall library windows where snowflakes stuck like tiny stars. But there were nights she murmured when he came home late, or bruised, or too quiet. "I thought maybe he just worked too hard." But now she swallowed. "Now I'm not sure he was only a carpenter." Before Jason could respond, the library door opened with a jingle, and a local patron stepped in, a middle-aged man named Len Carter, tall and slightly overweight, with a trimmed salt-and-pepper beard and a plaid jacket dusted with snow. Len was known around town for being kind but chronically curious, the type who asked too many questions at bake sales. "Morning, Nora O." He froze when he noticed Jason's sharp suit and more sharply watchful eyes. "Didn't mean to interrupt." Jason offered a polite nod, the kind that discouraged further inquiry. Len, perceptive enough to sense invisible boundaries, simply gave Nora a quick smile and retreated to the periodicals section. When he was out of earshot, Nora exhaled shakily. "So, my grandfather knew something." "He knew more than something," Jason replied. "He hid a key fragment in a book he passed on to you. That means he wanted it found eventually." Nora looked down at her hands. "Why me?" A soft, uncertain laugh escaped her. "I shelve books for a living. I'm not part of any intelligent story." Jason studied her, her gentleness, her earnest confusion, and something in his chest tightened, a faint echo of the past he tried so hard to bury. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "the person carrying the answer is the one who never thought to look." Nora glanced again at the key fragment, and an unease grew behind her eyes, not fear, but the painful suspicion that her grandfather's life might have been a tapestry woven with threads she never saw. And if he had been more than a carpenter, then what else had she inherited? Without knowing, snow drifted heavier against the windows, muffling the outside world. Inside the warm library, the truth waited on the counter, shining in the soft glow like a question that had slept 50 years beneath paper and dust. Jason closed the book gently. "Nora, I need your help." She nodded because saying no had never been in her nature. And because some stories, like some keys, were meant to open only when the right hands found them. The winter evening wrapped Willowridge in a blue-gray hush as Jason Hale and Nora Bennett approached the abandoned school once more. The snow had thickened into a soft curtain, muting their footsteps and swallowing their breath like a patient creature observing them from the edges of the night. Jason moved with the quiet precision of a man accustomed to danger. Beside him, Nora walked more carefully, clutching the folded book in her arms as if it were a fragile lantern guiding her through a place she once believed harmless. The school looked different tonight, less like a forgotten building and more like a dormant animal, its cracked windows glinting faintly in the moonlight. Jason unlocked the rusted outer door, pushing it open with a low groan of metal. The interior smelled of mold-cold stone and decades of silence piled upon itself. The faint beam of Jason's flashlight sliced through the darkness, revealing peeling posters, abandoned desks, and dust suspended like drifting galaxies in the air. They descended toward the lower level, a hallway lined with rusting lockers. Halfway down, Nora noticed movement near the top of a row of lockers, a small wiry cat staring at them with unblinking curiosity. The creature was thin but elegant, its fur mottled gray and black like storm clouds. It couldn't have been older than a year. Nora paused. "I've seen that cat before," she whispered. "Near the library. It always follows me in winter." The cat blinked once as if acknowledging her, then hopped down noiselessly and vanished into the dark. Jason raised a brow. "Stray maybe." She murmured, though something in her voice suggested she suspected otherwise. Their footsteps echoed softly as they reached the basement corridor, a place Nora had never dared approach alone. At the end stood the steel door, looming in the darkness like a monument carved from fear itself. Jason knelt and fitted the copper key fragment into the central mechanism. The metal responded instantly, humming with a low resonance, as if welcoming an old friend. A vibration ran through the door, subtle yet unmistakable, like the shiver of a creature waking after a long winter sleep. Nora gripped her scarf. "It's alive." "No," Jason said quietly. "Just engineered by someone very clever." The lock released with a metallic sigh. The door cracked open. A wave of stale, warm air brushed past them, unnatural given the freezing temperatures outside. Jason pushed wider, revealing a room frozen in time and alive with details. The lights were dim but functional, casting a golden glow over an archive room that looked as though it had been sealed just yesterday rather than 50 years ago. Filing cabinets lined the walls in neat rows. In the center stood a wide oak table. Hundreds of folders lay open upon it, their pages rustling softly in the faint airflow from an unseen vent. Nora stepped closer, her breath catching as she recognized the layout, methodical, intentional, almost ritualistic. Jason scanned the table, his gaze sharpening when he noticed the object placed neatly beside the papers, a porcelain teacup. Steam still clung to the inside surface. It had been used minutes ago, not decades. He moved instinctively, placing one hand behind Nora, guiding her slightly back. "Someone's been here," he murmured. "Recently." Nora swallowed. "Are they still here?" "Possibly." He checked corners, shadows, doorways, every crevice where a person could hide. But the room held its silence, closely betraying nothing. Nora, meanwhile, drifted toward a metal cabinet with a small emblem burned into its side, a carpenter's marking. Her hand trembled as she pulled the drawer open. Inside lay a notebook bound in cracked leather. The cover bore a name written in delicate cursive, Harold Bennett. Her grandfather. Nora exhaled as though her ribs were collapsing inward. Jason watched her carefully as she opened it. Inside, the pages were filled with diagrams of the school's old ventilation system, maps of tunnels beneath Willow Ridge, and paragraphs written in hurried, slanting handwriting. Jason stepped closer. "What is it?" Nora's voice was barely audible. "It's his. He never wrote things down unless he wanted them remembered." She skimmed a page. The words hit her like falling stones. Local infiltration attempt confirmed. Protecting the children and the town must come first. If they breach the lower level, use the emergency lock. Tell no one. Tears welled in her eyes. He saved the town. He actually saved it. There was a spy ring here right under everyone's noses. But he never said a word. Jason softened. "Your grandfather was braver than most agents I've worked with." Nora wiped her cheek. "He stayed silent because he didn't want to frighten anyone. He thought the town deserved peace." Jason opened another part of the notebook. "Look at this." Nora leaned in. The final page contained a drawing of the same copper key fragment, with 3 more fragments beside it, forming a complete key. But below the drawing was a warning. If the room opens again, it means someone is still searching, and they are not one of us. A sudden sound sliced through the silence, the flutter of paper sharp and definite, coming from deeper inside the archive room. Nora stiffened. Jason reached for his concealed holster. The rustling grew louder, as if someone were turning pages rapidly, impatiently, yet no footsteps accompanied it. The sound came from a back corner where the light dimmed into shadow. Jason stepped forward, muscles taut, but before he reached the corner, the noise stopped. The room fell into a chilling stillness. Jason Nora whispered, "Whatever was here, it knew we arrived," he said. He scanned the room again, every nerve in his body alert. On the oak table, the teacup still glistened faintly, as if mocking them with its warmth. Nora clutched her grandfather's notebook, holding it to her chest like a shield. Jason stood beside her, jaw-tight eyes, scanning every corner. And deep within the room, beneath the cold hum of lights, the quiet of 50 years pressed in again, watchful waiting. The archive room held its breath as Jason Hale swept his flashlight toward the back wall, where the sound of rustling pages had led him only moments before. The beam glimmered across dust-moat shelves and yellowed folders, nothing more. But Jason's instincts, sharpened by years of espionage and mistakes he still carried, like ghosts, told him the room was not finished revealing itself. Nora Bennett stood beside him, clutching her grandfather's notebook against her chest, her breathing shallow but steady. Her eyes, soft brown, made for reading rather than witnessing old secrets, followed every movement of Jason's hand as he examined the far corner. He pressed his palm along the concrete, searching for irregularities. When his fingers grazed a faint metal ridge almost invisible beneath a thin layer of dust, a click echoed through the room. The sound was so abrupt that Nora gasped and stepped closer to him as though proximity might anchor her. A panel in the wall shifted. Slowly, with a grating whisper that seemed too alive for a structure so old, the wall slid aside. A warm glow spilled out a soft amber light that did not belong to an abandoned facility. Jason raised his flashlight and stepped inside first. Nora followed. It was a narrow chamber no larger than a modest bedroom. A folding cot sat against the wall, its thin mattress neatly made, as though its occupant maintained military precision, even in solitude. A battered shortwave radio rested on a crate, still humming faintly, picking up static from distant frequencies. On a hook above the bed hung a weathered CIA field jacket, the emblem faded, but still unmistakable. The air smelled of tea dust and years of waiting. And then a shape moved in the far corner. Nora froze. Jason's posture shifted instantly, alert, defensive, but he did not reach for his holster. Something about the movement was slow-old, almost gentle. A figure stepped into the light. The man was tall but stooped by time his silver-white hair combed back with quiet dignity. His face bore deep lines carved from solitude rather than bitterness. His eyes, clear, bright, impossibly alive, held a calm intelligence that radiated warmth rather than threat. The man lifted his hands slowly, not in surrender, but in greeting. "No need for alarms," he said, voice low, softened by decades of disuse. "I've been waiting a very long time for this door to open." Nora's breath caught. Jason stared, stunned, yet controlled. The man offered a weary smile. "My name is Thomas Mercer." Jason inhaled sharply. He had prepared for a corpse, a myth, or a file long buried, but not this. Thomas Mercer, officially missing since 1978, stood before them like a ghost who chose to remain flesh. Mercer stepped toward the warm lamp, revealing more details. A lean frame shoulders still marked by the remnants of strength, hands calloused from time spent working with tools or machines, a posture both proud and humble. He wore a simple navy sweater and gray trousers clothes, preserved carefully, not the attire of a madman, but of someone determined to stay human. Nora's voice trembled. "You're alive?" Mercer's gaze softened. Alive. Yes, living somewhat. He turned to Jason. You're CIA. That much is obvious from your haircut alone. They didn't send anyone for 50 years. Why now? Because the lock finally opened, Jason replied quietly. Mercer nodded as though confirming something he'd long suspected. Then his eyes turned to Nora. He looked at her for several seconds, long searching too knowing. A small warm laugh escaped him, cracking the silence. You look just like your grandfather, he said. Same eyes, same stubborn curiosity he carried like a badge. Nora's lips parted, confusion flickering through her whole expression. Jason glanced at her, but stayed silent, letting Mercer continue. The older man sighed and sat on the edge of the cot, his movements careful but sure. Your grandfather saved this town, Mercer said gently. He saved me too, and then he locked this door to keep the danger from ever returning. Nora stepped closer, gripping her notebook. But why did you stay here? Why remain trapped? Mercer exhaled through his nose, an old tired sound. Because I discovered something in this room in 1972, something I couldn't let fall into the wrong hands. We thought Soviet infiltrators were planting operatives in small towns, hiding them where no one suspected. Willowridge was one of those attempts. He gestured around the archive room. These records contain names, assignments codes. If someone hostile got hold of them, the entire region would have collapsed into paranoia. Nora blinked. So you locked yourself in. Someone had to guard them, Mercer said simply. Your grandfather locked the door from the outside, and I stayed on the inside. It was supposed to be temporary. But then, events spiraled. Jason's voice softened. Why didn't you escape? Break the lock call for help. Mercer chuckled, not bitterly, but with the resigned humor of a man who had made peace with himself long ago. You assume I didn't try. But communications were sabotaged. Later, when the danger passed, the CIA quietly buried the entire operation. Files labeled me missing. Perhaps they thought I was dead. Perhaps it was easier. Jason studied him. Thomas Mercer did not look broken. He looked preserved, as though years of solitude had carved him into something stoic, patient, almost monk-like. Nora moved closer, her voice trembling but kind. Why keep waiting? Why hope someone would ever open the door again? Mercer looked at her with a warmth that made her chest tighten. Because your grandfather told me someone in his family would come looking someday. He said, curiosity runs in your blood. Nora pressed a hand to her mouth, emotions breaking like thawing ice. Jason felt something shift inside him, a quiet recognition. He understood now this mission was never about uncovering Cold War secrets. It was about rescuing a man history had abandoned, a man who had waited half a century in the dark, believing that the world had not forgotten him. Mercer stood slowly. So he said, gently brushing dust from his jacket, "Are we finally going outside?" Jason nodded once. Firm. Mercer smiled, small, hopeful, and unbearably human. For the first time in 50 winters, the snow over Willowridge felt lighter, as if the sky itself exhaled in relief the moment Thomas Mercer stepped out of the underground room. Jason Hale walked beside him, one steady hand hovering near the older man's arm, though Thomas insisted he could manage on his own. The winter light poured across Thomas's face, illuminating every line carved by half a century of solitude. Yet beneath the years there was an unmistakable glow, something quietly triumphant, like the first flicker of dawn after too long a night. Nora Bennett followed a few steps behind, holding her grandfather's notebook close to her chest. The cold wind reddened her cheeks, and her brown hair fluttered gently behind her scarf. She watched Thomas with a mixture of awe and tenderness, as though witnessing a legend step out of a storybook into the breathing world. At the top of the snowy hill overlooking the school, 2 agents awaited them. The first was Agent Miriam Cole, a tall woman in her early 40s with a severe chin-length haircut the color of wet slate. She had sharp gray eyes set behind rectangular glasses and carried herself with an efficiency that bordered on impatience. Though she rarely smiled, she was respected in the agency for her fairness shaped by the loss of her younger brother who had vanished during an early CIA assignment. That wound made her both stern and fiercely protective of agents who survived the impossible. Beside her stood Agent Drew Halper, younger mid-30s, with sandy hair and a freckled face that gave him a deceptively boyish look. His build was sturdy, and he had a habit of standing with his hands awkwardly clasped behind his back as if unsure what to do with them. Drew was known for being kind-hearted and slightly nervous, a former schoolteacher who changed careers when espionage training turned out to be unexpectedly easier for him than controlling 8th graders. They both stared at Thomas Mercer as if witnessing a ghost. Agent Cole spoke first, her voice steady but thickened by disbelief. "Mr. Mercer, we thought you were dead." Thomas smiled gently. "I had my moments thinking the same." Drew swallowed hard, stepping forward with a mixture of awe and guilt. "Sir, on behalf of everyone, on behalf of the agency, we're sorry. We failed you." Thomas touched the younger man's shoulder with a slow, reassuring pat. "No. History gets messy. What matters is that someone came back." And though he didn't turn to look at them both, Jason and Nora felt the weight of those words settle warmly over them. Hours later, in a temporary operations cabin set up in the Willowridge Town Hall, Thomas Mercer sat across from a panel of officials reviewing his old records. Jason stood quietly along the wall as Agent Cole summarized the findings, every detail corroborating Harold Bennett's heroism and Thomas's sacrifice. The old files were officially reopened, corrected, and updated. A new classification replaced all others on Thomas Mercer's profile: cleared, honored, restored. Nora watched through the glass partition, her hands pressed lightly against the cold frame. The sight of Thomas reclaiming his place in the world felt like stitching a torn page back into the right book. Later, when Thomas stepped out into the lobby, the air shifted, warm, relieved. A small group of townspeople had gathered, having heard rumors of a man long lost returning home. Among them stood Marjorie Layton, an elderly woman with silver curls tucked under a knitted hat, holding a metal cane decorated with tiny carved flowers. Marjorie had been Thomas's neighbor 50 years ago. She was small, with soft hazel eyes and a gentle stoop, but her spirit was sharp. She was the kind of woman who remembered every birthday and every broken heart in the town. She moved toward Thomas slowly, more from disbelief than age. "Tommy," she whispered, voice trembling. Thomas froze. The years melted from his face. "Marjorie?" She touched his cheek as if confirming he was flesh, not memory. Tears shimmered in her eyes. "You never called. You never came home." He bowed his head, voice cracking with a grief no prison could harden. "I wanted to. Every day." Marjorie embraced him tightly, her cane clattering gently to the floor. The lobby fell silent, warmed by a reunion long overdue. By late afternoon, after statements were signed and winter sun began dipping toward the horizon, Jason slipped away from the bustle and walked to the town library. He found Nora inside, gently arranging a stack of returned books. Her movements were calm and rhythmic, as though tidying the world one quiet gesture at a time. She didn't notice him at first until he stepped closer and spoke softly. "Busy, saving the world one shelf at a time." She looked up startled, then smiled a small warm smile that reached her eyes. It softened something inside him he had forgotten how to name. "You came back," she said. "I wasn't sure you would." Jason leaned against the counter hands in his coat pockets. "I wasn't sure either." Nora lowered her gaze, her fingers tracing the spine of a book. For so long, her world had been filled with silence, comfortable, predictable silence. But now, for the first time, she found silence that felt full instead of empty. "Thank you," she murmured, "for helping Thomas, for helping my grandfather's legacy." Jason shook his head. "You're the one who carried the key. I only followed the trail." She laughed lightly. "I didn't know I was carrying anything at all." Sometimes, he said softly, people with quiet lives hold the loudest truths. Their eyes met steady, searching, unfearful. Outside, the snow began to lift as though Willowridge had finally earned a softer season. That evening, Thomas Mercer reunited with the few remaining members of his family, distant cousins, a niece he never met, and Marjorie, who refused to let him out of her sight. Nora preserved her grandfather's notebook in the library archives, its pages now recognized as part of Willow Ridge's hidden history. Jason Hale, after years of wandering between missions, felt something inside him finally loosen, as though he too had stepped out of a locked room. And beneath the old school in the darkness that once guarded secrets and sorrow, the final page settled into stillness. No more rustling, no more whispers, because the reader had stepped into the light.